How do you score dough to create that beautiful ear and expansion? And what does a beautifully baked loaf sound and look like when you slice into it? Hi, I'm Evie, and welcome to part three, the finale of my From Starter to Slice series. Over this series, we've covered the complete sourdough journey. In part one, we rescued a neglected starter. In part two, we mixed, stretched, and shaped dough with Gloria, my starter that I created back in February of 2024. And in part three, today, we will score and bake a lovely loaf of multi seed sourdough bread. The loaf that was mixed in part two will be featured in an upcoming short, but today I'm baking a different loaf, a lovely multi-seed sourdough I prepared a couple days ago. It's been cold proofing in the fridge and it's ready for the oven. Let's finish this journey from starter to slice. First, I preheated my oven at 475 degrees Fahrenheit with the Dutch oven inside for about 30 minutes before taking the dough out of the fridge. We want that Dutch oven to be extremely hot. Here is my silicone sling that I use to hold the dough in the Dutch oven. It keeps it from sticking to the bottom. And on the sling, I will gently but confidently flip the bowl over to release the dough onto the sling. This dough is cold and firm from the fridge, which is ideal for scoring because cold dough is much easier to cut cleanly. I'm first dusting the top with brown rice flour, which doesn't absorb moisture like regular flour, so it stays on the surface and helps to create a beautiful contrast with the scoring pattern. Now I'm using my bread lum with a fresh razor blade because a sharp blade is essential for clean cuts. It's time to score. Here I'm doing my signature scoring pattern, a decorative wheat stalk on the left third of the dough, and a single expansion score near the center. I realized after the fact that I could have placed the expansion score a little bit further from center and also could have angled it a little bit better, but I'll explain more of that later. I always do the decorative score first, starting with a straight line to mark the top center of the wheat stalk. I then add small diagonal cuts. Sometimes I'll do it alternating sides. Sometimes I'll do it just the left side first and then the right side. But each cut is about 1 inch long and angled at about 35 to 45 degrees from the center. The key though is consistency. You want each kernel to be about the same length and angle so that it has a bit of a uniform look in the end result. Moving to the center right area of the loaf, I'm now going to add the expansion score, and this is the functional score that controls how the bread expands in the oven. This is critical that I hold the blade at about a 30 to 45 degree angle as opposed to straight up and down, but you do want it to be almost parallel to the surface. As you can see here, I did have it a little too perpendicular, which will show up more obviously after it's baked. But essentially, this angle creates an undercut, which will lift up during baking and become the ear, which is that crispy kind of dramatic ridge that you'll see at the top of the bread. In one smooth, confident motion, I am scoring from top to bottom, slightly off center, almost an inch deep. You can also cut again just to make sure it goes deep enough and is at the proper angle. But this is what helps make the ear appear in the bread. With the wheat stock and the expansion score in place, this loaf is ready to bake. Now it's time to bake. I'm using my oven mitts to carefully remove the Dutch oven from my oven and then to also carefully place the silicone sling inside of the Dutch oven. This sling will stay inside of the Dutch oven during the entire baking process. Now, the moisture from the dough will create steam within the covered Dutch oven, and this steam is essential for proper oven spring and crust development. You may see in other videos that sometimes people will spray their loaf with water or even place an ice cube or two inside of the Dutch oven to add additional steam. But I find that I prefer to just bake based off of the moisture that's already in my dough. And I do believe that not adding additional water is what contributes to the crumb being a bit tighter and just right for making toast as well as sandwich bread. So now with the lid on, I put it into the oven and then I lower the temperature of my oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. This will bake covered for 28 minutes in my oven. You may need more or less time for your baking needs. As you may have noticed, this loaf is loaded with inclusions, specifically sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, and flax seeds, which are all mixed in throughout the dough. One important note is that when you bake sourdough with inclusions like seeds, nuts, dried fruit, cheese, the baking time may be extended by an additional 5 minutes or so compared to plain sourdough. And this is because those inclusions, those additional ingredients, can add moisture and density to the loaf. You want your internal temperature of the bread to reach 205 degrees Fahrenheit for it to be a fully baked sourdough. And since these inclusions can actually slow down the penetration of heat into the bread, that's why it can take some additional time for it to bake completely. After baking at 450 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes covered, it's now time to remove the lid and reveal the oven spring for the final bake. So look at this. You can see that the wheat stalk opened beautifully and the ear formed along that expansion score. The oven spring here is nice, though I do think that it would have been a bit more dramatic had I made that expansion score a little closer to a 45-degree angle. I think it was a little bit too close to being almost a 90-degree angle to the dough rather than 45 degrees. But again, that's just another lesson learned. You just sort of have to experiment and see what works for you. Now, at this point, I'm checking the internal temperature and I can see it's already reached 205 degrees Fahrenheit. So I am going to continue baking the bread, however, because I would like for the crust to develop a deeper color and reach that sort of golden, rich, dark brown that I want. So I'm going to let it bake for another 10 to 12 minutes. And here it is, straight from the oven. Look at this crust color. It's a deep golden brown with some darker spots. The wheat stalk pattern is well defined, and the ear along the expansion score is nice and crispy. The seeds on the outside are toasted and golden. Everything looks great. So now comes the hardest part of this entire process, waiting, because you really should let the bread cool. I would recommend for at least an hour before slicing. There have been moments where I could not resist beyond 30 minutes, I admit, but I promise you, the crumb, right now it's still settling inside while it's still really hot, and cutting into it too early will give you more of a gummy texture to your bread. So just give it an hour. Just give it an hour. It'll still be warm in the inside. I promise you, it'll still be a nice temperature on the inside. So if you can just wait the hour, you'll be in good shape. But yes, after an hour, it's now time for the moment that we've all been waiting for, which is the crumb reveal. At this point, I'll stop talking and just let you hear it for yourself. Look at that crumb structure. It's open, it's airy, but not too open to where things are just going to fall out of the bread completely if you were to put butter or jam on it. And those seeds are so nicely distributed throughout. This is what a multi seed sourdough with inclusions should look like. You'll notice that earlier I kind of thumped on the bottom of the bread and you could hear sort of this thump sound. That's another indicator of the bread actually being done. So just want you to be aware of why I did that. But if you're also interested in knowing some of the best ways to store your sourdough bread, whether it's room temperature, in the refrigerator, or in the freezer, let me know in the comments. But this completes our journey from starter to slice. Again, in part one, we focused on rescuing a neglected starter and learned about starter health. Then in part two, we mixed dough with Gloria, performed stretches and folds, and shaped a beautiful loaf, which actually, I want to let you know, I'll reveal that loaf in a future YouTube short. So be sure to check that out. And then today we scored with intention, we baked with confidence, and we revealed a lovely crumb. This is sourdough bread making. It takes time, patience, and practice. But when you pull that loaf from the oven and slice into it, all the work is worth it. Whether you're just starting or you've been baking for years, every loaf teaches you something. Keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep baking. In Psalm 104, verses 14 through 15, it says, He causes the grass to grow for the cattle, and herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth, and wine that makes glad the heart of man, and oil to make his face to shine, and bread which strengthens man's heart. Bread is more than food. It's sustenance, nourishment, and connection. From the grain that grows, to the starter we cultivate, to the bread we bake and share. This process reminds us to slow down, to invest time in what matters, and to create something meaningful with our hands. If this series inspired you to start your own sourdough journey, my Sourdough Starter Success Bundle is the perfect place to begin. For just $3, you get a 7-day starter success checklist, the complete troubleshooting guide, and 3 delicious discard muffin recipes. You can get it at risenourishconnect.com/sourdough starter bundle. The link is in the description and pinned to the first comment of this video. It has everything you need to go from curious beginner to confident baker. Thank you for joining me on this journey from starter to slice. I hope this series gave you the knowledge, confidence, and inspiration to bake your own sourdough bread. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2 yet, go back and watch the full series. And if you loved this series, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Until next time, keep baking, keep rising, and keep nourishing. Rise, nourish, connect.